Okay, so modeling. There are a few different ways of modeling, and I'm going to start with a few of the spline generation style modelings that will make life a bit easier, depending on the things that you want to create. I will be a little bit fast, I have to admit, because we've got quite a bit to cover today, as you've seen, and what we'll be creating with Ellie, is going to take a bit of time. But of course, this is being recorded, so if you need to slow me down, you will be able to with one of the recordings that you will have available to you. But I'll try not to be too fast, and don't worry, you can still stop and ask questions. So that's, the fun of this part of it. So Cinema 4D S24, we have these things here called generators. There are a few on the right hand side which I won't be looking at, just purely for time constraints and the things that we're going to be looking at. But the ones that we're going to look at here on the left hand side are our spline generators. The first one we look at is an extrude generator. Now, if I create this, you can see there is absolutely nothing on my screen except the axis and the extrude generator object itself on the right hand side in my object manager. Generators, as their name suggests, will generate a shape based on information that they are given. Same way in real life, like an electricity generator will generate electricity based on fuel going in. Okay, so that's one of the things that it does. So what we're going to do is grab something that will be the fuel for our object. And that, in this instance, will be our splines. So what I want to do is grab one of my splines, and I'm going to make this an easy one. I'm going to grab a text spline. And you can see that I've got a text spline and something that says text spline, and it says the word text in the text spline box. Let's change that to something else. Let's change that to extrude. Now I've just changed the word. If I press enter, it will make another line. So don't press enter, just click off and it will update. I'm going to press H on my keyboard just to focus on my geometry. If you were with us last week, then you know what we did to make the bend deformers and the objects one and the other. We would put the bend deformer in the object. Okay, that's one way around. This way, we do something different. And it is like you would expect. With an electricity generator, which generates electricity, you put fuel in the generator. This is the same principle. So the text, being the spline, being the fuel, goes inside the generator. And for those of you that remember from last week, if you click and hold on your spline, you need to wait until the arrow points down, and then you will drop that inside, and boom, we have an extrude. Okay, so that is extruded. That is an extrude object. We can still change both of these things because they are both non-editable objects in that they're not polygonal. We can still change things. So if I want to change what my text spline says, hello, and then click off, then it updates. If I want to change how far my object extrudes, then I can go that way. I can even click and drag and go backwards as well if I particularly want to. So there's hours of fun doing this. I have caps as well, and they are the front and back of the extrude. And I can choose rounding, so you can see that I can round those out. And in my little preset library here, I've got a load preset. You can see I've got a few different types of pre-made caps that I can choose, and I can create them, and they can give a really funky look to my objects that I can extrude. So that's the extrude very quickly. Okay, have we got any questions so far? Three, two, one. No, good. Okay, so that's the extrude. Ellie will be looking more into that obviously in a bit. I'm going to do file and new, and let's have a look at.
Matt,
hello. Yep.
I was fully talking then, and I didn't realize I was muted. And then there was a countdown. I was thinking, am I not speaking? So yeah, no questions at the moment. A couple from Drake that we'll get to kind of a bit later on today, I think.
Right. Okay. That's fair enough. So let's look at the second of our extrudes. Seconds of our generators. Get the words right. and that is my lathe. Now, the lathe generator, for those of you who may have a guess, a lathe is a manufacturing device used in real life, not just in 3D. It works with metal and wood, and you take a long piece of wood or metal, and then you stick pins in both sides, and then the thing rotates really, really fast. And then you use some form of sharp tool to draw along the edge as this thing spins, and you will shape that material into the thing that you want it to be. Kind of like chair legs or banisters and things like that, stuff that has a very uniform process all the way around the outside. And that's what this does. This takes a profile, a shape that you make, and profiles it, sweeps it, rotates it, revolves it, many different words for the same thing, 360 degrees all the way around. You can see from the icon that the first example that it has is a lathe, is a vase. So just to quickly demonstrate, now just demonstrate, don't try and follow, for those of you that are trying to follow. If I use my pen tool like this, I'm going to just make a wine glass, a very odd wine goblet. The one thing that you should never, ever do is what I have just done, which is to use your spline tool in 3D, because you just don't quite know where it's going to put those points for you. So don't do that. So let's delete my spline. What you need to do is use one of the side or front views that we looked at last week. So I'm going to use my middle click or my F keys or the button up here, top right, click that, and then I'm going to use either the right or the front. Do not use the top, because if you use the top, you'll get a pancake. You just will, because it revolves around the Y axis. So you need to do something that will butt up against the Y axis. If you use the top down, it will just revolve and you'll get a pancake. So let's use the front view. Let's go to my spline pen. And for those of you who might be used to Photoshop and Illustrator and things like that, this is a path. Okay, so I'm just going to roughly guess this. I'm not going to try and be accurate at this point. So I'm going to create a starting point, and if you click and hold, you get the tangent handles to allow for curvature. You can see like this. I'm just going to do this, and then if you want a straight line, just click, and I can then do straight lines that way. Okay, once you are done, press escape on your keyboard, and that will clear that for you. And then, as we've discussed earlier, we need to now associate one with the other. We take the spline, being the fuel, and pop it in the generator. Click and hold till the arrow points down, let go, boom. You can see I've got a wireframe view, so let's go to my 3D view, which is F1 on people's keyboards. And there I have my lathed egg cup, maybe not a wine glass, maybe a goblet, don't know. Oh, I've got some fun going on in there, and some fun at the top as well. Now, I did that deliberately. You may find, certainly as if you're doing it as carelessly as I was, that when you look, you have a hole in the top of your lathe. This is because this point is not exactly at 0. You can see if I turn off my lathe object using the generator green tick, I still have my spline, that my spline point is not at 0. I can keep nudging that a bit, but what I can actually do, I can select that point, and then in my X and Z, you need to make sure that both of these are 0. So Z is already 0 because it's the distance. X, I'll make 0, press enter, and that's now directly at 0, and I no longer have a hole in the top of my goblet of fire. The other side, however, we have the opposite issue, which is that I was so careless that I went the other side. So rather than having a hole, my stuff is clipping. You can see now I have a hole, now it's clipping, now I have a hole. Exactly the same principle, just make sure that the X and Z coordinates for those two are zeroed out, and I will get a nice rounded shape with no holes or gaps. The spline is still, as you've noticed, completely editable. and changeable. So if I want to change this, I can change the spline. I can click and drag to add more points. So if I command click somewhere on the spline, I've got another point that I can add, and I have created some form of 60s lamp, don't know. Mushroom, not really sure. But either way, I'll put my teeth in today. You will be able to see that I can revolve this shape 360 degrees all the way around. Okay, anything else for that one? Any questions before I move on to the next one?
I will remember to unmute myself this time. So a quick question from E-Page. Is there a secret method to know when to put the deformer? So I think this was relating to last week, perhaps. Is there a secret method to know when to put the deformer into the object versus putting the object into the deformer?
Yes, because it depends on which one you're using. Deformers, these over here, the blue ones, they go into an object you wish to deform because you are distorting a shape. So if you want to deform something, you say, I am a shape, deform with this. These are generators, both of these, and it's the color largely that you'll get away with. You'll figure it out. Blue is a deformer. It will deform. It needs to be a child. Green, which as you can see actually is quite a lot of these things, means that it is a generator and you put things inside it to generate shapes out.
Thanks. Also, how did you view the top bit of your spline?
I just looked at it. I moved around with the camera. So using my Alt key, I just moved around to see where it was. I can turn my lathe off at any point, and then I can just view around my spline that way.
Cool, thanks.
That's right.
I think that's it for now.
Cool, right, let's move on. I'm actually going to skip that one just for the minute, and I'm going to go to the bottom one. Now, these little icons do actually give you some interesting indications. They obviously show you what they're going to do. White little square box thing is the spline, and then it shows you what it will generate. The white part of the lathe shows you the outline and then what it will generate. The sweep, let's drop. This has two little white lines. It has a profile and a path. That is because the sweep will use two splines. So let's create my sweep, and I'm going to create two splines. I'm going to create a circle. There it is, that was hard. And then I'm going to create a star, and I'm going to shrink the star using my scale tool. I'm just going to shrink it down to about that. Now, what this does is it takes a shape and it sweeps it round the other. And invariably, I have taught this, and everyone goes, yeah. And then I show them the example, and I do this, and everyone goes, eh, until I do this. Ah, everybody goes. So what happens is the star is being swept around the circle, which you can change and edit depending on the sizes of the things that you need to do. You can take your star and you can change your star sizes. You can see that that changes that. You can take the circle and you can increase its radius, and you can see that that gets bigger and it just sweeps its way around. So it's still not set. You know, I've still got the ability of adding and changing stuff. You've also got to be careful which way round these go as well. So if I take the circle and put that first, remember it sweeps A around B. So if I make my circle now much smaller, you can see that I have a circle now going around the star. Okay, so that allows you to use sweeps for all sorts of really interesting things that, to be honest, would have been really tricky any other way. I use it a lot for cables, wires, skirtings, covings, picture frames, all of those sorts of things that have a uniform profile that fit round a generic shape. Okay, any questions on that one?
Yes, we've got 2 questions actually. First one is, does a sweep automatically detect the best orientation for the sweep object?
Good question. Not necessarily. Depending on the orientation that your planes or your shapes are made at, you may get some interesting, that's a fun one, variance on a theme. So you need to check what plane your shapes are generated on and then switch between them just to see what will work for you.
Cool. Also another question, a quick question. How would you make a 3D dotted path? I know how I would make it. How would you make it? I wouldn't make it with any of this stuff. I would use the cloner.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And then a tube, and then either clone it along a path to cheat that way. But there is no way of doing it with a sweep, is there? That I can. That's about as good as I get with a dotted line, I think, I'm afraid, in that.
Yeah, I would.
No, definitely wouldn't use a sweep for that. Yeah. If we get time, we might come back to that. If not, we'll take that as a list of interesting questions to look at another point, I think.
Cool. Final quick one. Paul is asking, can you bring in a vector path from Illustrator?
Yes, you can. And I was going to get to that just after I finished all of these.
You're ahead of us, Paul.
Okay, right, moving on. The last one that we're going to look at very quickly is the loft. Now, as I've already discussed, this shape has 1 spline, this shape has 1 spline, this shape has 2 splines, this shape has 3. This means that you can use as many splines as you want. Please ignore the fact that it says 3. You can't have an infinite number of splines on this, so it's just an idea. But what the Loft one does is it kind of treats the splines as a wooden frame, and then it tries to stretch a skin over the outlines of the wooden frame. So, for example, let's create a rectangle. Brilliant. Using the method that we were shown last week, I'm going to hold down Command or Control on your keyboard and click and drag the arrows, and now I've got 2. And then I'm going to put both of these in the loft, and I've just got to make sure I'm going in the right way. So that's number 1, that's number 2, that's fine. Let's take number 3, and I'm going to control drag, and I'm going to create another one, and I'm going to move it down. Woo, curvature. Okay, so if I turn off my loft, you can see that I have 3 splines going from square to square to square, and it's skinning them. Let's try something else. Let's try a circle and put that at the end of my loft, and now it's going to a circle. Brilliant. Let's try and be complicated. Let's go to a star. Drag and drop, plop. Oh, it's going to it, but it's inside there. So let's turn it that way. You can see, huzzah, that no matter where you put it, it will try and make a shape to it. It's making some interesting assumptions at the moment. We shall get to that in a second. Let's try going from a star to a flower, which is obviously a lot more complicated shape. So let's put the flower at the end. Boom. Oop, missed. Don't make it a child of the star. Make it that. Ah, that is not a flower. If I turn off the flower, I have a star. But that's also a star. Now, the reason for this is the loft generator itself is given a certain number of subdivisions, certain number of points it has been allowed to convert one shape to another. In this instance, it's been given 16, which, as you can see, is nowhere near enough for it to figure out how to get from a star to a complicated shape like a flower. So let's just try increasing this. Interesting, not still what I wanted. Okay, you can see that it's trying, it's getting a bit blockier if I keep going up. Let's go crazy. Let's put 120 in. Ooh, there we go. Now we have something that looks a lot better It's still got some funny shading, but that's more just a case of it trying to make stuff smooth. But you can see that it is now working its way from a a star to a flower. I was giving away what I was about to do, which is the fact that I'm going to create a cogwheel, which of course is an incredibly more complicated shape than a star and flower. And I'm going to put that at the very end. Whoop. And you can see that I've got something cogwheely, but I've got nowhere near the detail that this has. So once again, I'm going to go to my loft and I'm just going to click and drag and whack up my subdivisions until they're something ridiculous, but the shape is what I want it to be. And these are all still movable, they're all still editable, they're all still resizable, even rotatable if you want to really change the shape that you're getting. And the loft will simply try its best to make it from one shape to the other. It's a bit of an odd one, but it is actually really useful when you start thinking of shapes that you can make in forms of like the wooden frames. Like, how can I strip this down and make it into something that can make this work? I mean, I've used it for chess pieces, I've used it for coffee cups, I've used it for toothpaste tubes and things like that, because it's quite quick to be able to piece these things together. Okay, that's another super fast one. Ellie, have we got any questions?
Yes, a couple. So Anna was asking, would you use that in morphing? And I was just about to ask whether it was going to be animated morphing or
you could animate the splines themselves if you wanted to, so that you could make some form of interesting wobbly creation. That would be possible, yes.
Cool. Yeah, a few others coming in. Is there a limit to how many splines you can use with a loft?
Not that I'm aware of.
I've used a lot as well before.
I think it's a lot.
Yeah, not that we've come across yet.
No.
And then a couple just relating to the sweep. So Matthew was asking, how did you show the side of the star?
That was, oh dear, I must undo that. On my sweep, there is an end growth percentage. So this is something that you can animate as well. So you can animate your shape growing along the spline with your end growth, or the other way, start growth percentage. Whoop.
Cool, thanks. One last one. Can you control the rounding of the sweep?
The sweep depends on what shape it is that you are sweeping. So I am sweeping a circle all the way round. If I deleted that and I had a hexagon instead, which I will definitely need to shrink, then I would have a hexagonal shape all the way round. So the shape that is going round the sweep is entirely based on what the shape is you are sweeping round it.
Cool. Kind of same question for the loft. Can you control the rounding on the loft at all?
Yeah, there is a smoothing thing. As you can see, I've got a lot of subdivisions on the mesh U coordinate system, which is giving me a lot of rounding to get the shapes to get that. The isopram subdivision, mesh subdivision V will give me more smoothing to get like the joints between them a bit more smoother, if that's what they mean by rounding.